My son looked at me that night with eyes as cold as a winter frost and said it without stuttering. "I cannot stand feeding you anymore, Dad." Just like that, as if every plate on the table had been a burden he could no longer carry. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just smiled that half smile of a man who finally understands his place. And right there, while the silence hung heavy between us, I made myself a promise. The next day, I was going to do something he would never forget. My name is Frank. I am 76 years old, and I was born in the coal hills of West Virginia. I worked my whole life, ever since I was a boy. First in the fields, hauling baskets and tending to the animals. Then in construction, laying bricks under the hot sun until my hands bled and calloused over. With those hands, I raised my family. I was never a man of luxury, but I was always a man of my word. I was married to the same woman for over 40 years. My Hope. That was her name, and that was what she was to me. She was a strong woman, quiet, the kind who did not need to say much to hold a home together. We had 3 children, but life sometimes makes decisions for you. One passed away young. Another moved far away and does not even call on holidays. And I was left with one, David. The quietest one, the proudest one, the one who said he would always be with me. When Hope passed away, I stayed alone in our little house. It was a humble place, but built with effort and memory. It was where we raised the 3 of them, where we cried together, where we celebrated birthdays and Sunday dinners with beef stew in the pot. But after the funeral, David spoke to me with that convincing voice of his. "Come home, Dad. I do not want you to be alone. We have space." And me? Well, I wanted to believe. I wanted to think there was still some family warmth left. So I packed my suitcase, tucked away Hope's photo, turned off the lights in my house, and went with him. At first, everything seemed fine. They gave me a room in the back with a small window. His wife, Patricia, was a bit cold, but polite enough. The grandkids were my joy. 2 lively kids who came running to hug me when they got home from school. I helped however I could. I swept the porch, washed the dishes, heated up the dinner rolls, and never asked for anything. But little by little, you start to notice the cracks. First, it was the coffee disappearing from the pantry. Then Patricia's subtle comments that the electric bill was going up too fast, that we had to cut back on expenses. Later, the lunches became smaller, more silent. I started to feel that my presence was not welcome. David became more distant, too busy, with a tired look every time I opened my mouth to tell a story. And I understand it, you know? Not all children know how to grow old with their parents. But that night was different. There were no hints or sighs. There were words. Hard words. "I cannot stand having to feed you anymore." And he said it like someone talking about an old piece of furniture that is just in the way. I did not answer. I did not cry. I did not yell. I just smiled. Because I understood. I understood that to my son, I was no longer his father. I was just another bill to pay. It is funny how the people you taught to walk are the first ones to wish you would just sit down and stay out of the way. That night I went back to my room in silence. I closed the door slowly. I sat on the bed. I did not turn on the light. I sat in the dark, feeling the silence get thicker. And right there I told myself, tomorrow everything is going to change. Because when you lose a son's respect, the only thing left is to recover yourself. I slept very little, but at sunrise I got up early. I put on my favorite shirt, the one Hope had given me for our last anniversary. I combed my hair with care, as if it were Sunday service. I put some papers in my briefcase, grabbed my cane, and left without making a sound. No one saw me leave. No one stopped me. I walked slowly through the neighborhood streets, waving to the baker, the security guard, a neighbor who barely recognized me. I was in no hurry. What I was going to do required calm and dignity, because sometimes a father's silence hurts more than any word. And I, Frank, decided that day that the silence was over. Listen to this story until the end, because what happened after that walk, nobody in that house expected. I returned to the house just before dusk. No one had noticed my absence. Patricia was in the kitchen chopping something without looking at me. David was sitting in the armchair with his phone in his hand, so deep in his world that he did not even look up. I walked to my room with a calm step, as always. I closed the door, hung up my shirt carefully, and sat again on that bed that no longer felt like mine. I felt like a guest with no checkout date, someone tolerated, barely noticed. But that night, although my body was there, my decision was already made. Something inside me had aligned, like a beam that was about to snap but decided firmly to hold. I got up early the next day, before dawn. I made my own coffee with the little I had hidden in the cupboard and went out again towards downtown. There at the county clerk's office, I walked in with a steady step. The young woman at the front desk recognized me immediately. "Mr. Frank, so good to see you here again." I just smiled at her. It was time to put things in their place. The deed to my house, the one I called the Solitude Place, was still in my name. No one in David's house knew it, but I never sold it. I had only rented it to an old trusted friend. And not only that, I had an old savings account, modest but steady, money I had been putting away during all those years of hard work. The truth is, I never depended on anyone. I stayed at David's house for love, because I wanted to feel like there was still family. But love that is not returned is just dead weight, and I was no longer willing to carry that. After the registry, I went to the bank. I verified everything. I updated my information. I changed my PIN codes. I signed documents. I asked for my statements and tucked them away carefully. And then I went to a place David did not even know existed. A small cabin I inherited from my father, far from everything, out in the country. It had been empty for years, but it was still mine. A simple roof, a wide plot of land, apple trees, silence. That was where I was going to start over. Without luxury, but with peace. And more importantly, with freedom. I realized then that freedom isn't about having the most money. It is about not having to apologize for taking up space. I went back to the house that afternoon with a different kind of serenity. Patricia, as always, did not say a word to me. David, seeing me enter, let out a, "Ah, the old man is back," and he laughed under his breath. It almost made me laugh, too. He had no idea. I slept peacefully that night, and the next day, I waited for everyone to leave. I started packing my things. I folded every garment calmly. I gathered my papers. I put Hope's photos in the suitcase with care. And when I finished, I left an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, a note written with my steady handwriting. "Thank you for everything. Do not worry any more about feeding me. That is already taken care of. God bless you." I closed the door behind me without making a noise. I walked to the Greyhound station. I carried a backpack, a suitcase, and a relief in my chest that I had not felt in years. The trip to the cabin took about 3 hours. When I arrived, the smell of the countryside hugged me as if saying, "Finally." I spent the day cleaning what was necessary, dusting off old furniture, hanging up my porch rocker. I cooked my own beef stew with garlic and onions, just how I like it. And I ate with pleasure, with calm, without feeling like a burden, without anyone reminding me I was in the way. That night, lying on my cot, looking at the stars through the living room window, I thought about everything. About how you think you need a full house to feel alive. But the truth is that a house full of contempt is worth less than a humble corner with respect. For the first time in a long time, I slept with peace in my heart. And in that good silence, I understood. It was not me who needed them. I never was. But them, they were going to notice my absence. And that was just beginning. The first days in the cabin passed like a long breath. I got up early, as I always did, before the sun came up. I lit the stove with dry wood, brewed my strong coffee, the kind that wakes up your bones. I sat on the bench on the porch, listening to the neighbors' roosters crowing in the distance. I had no television, no internet, no one talking to me. But I had something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. Silence without tension, time without guilt, space without reproach. I dedicated myself to fixing the leaks in the roof, clearing the weeds from the garden, repairing the fence. I went back and forth to the town market where the old men still greet you by tipping their hats and children run barefoot. I did not need much. I bought my vegetables, some bread, a piece of fresh cheese, and every now and then a bit of meat for the weekend. I got used to living with little quickly, because I was already tired of living with too much contempt. But even though the soul settles down, the heart takes longer, and there was something inside me I could not let go of. It was not anger, no. It was not hate. It was disappointment. The kind that makes no noise but feels heavy. Because no matter how much you convince yourself you are better off alone, there is something in you that keeps asking how we got to this. How did we get to the point where a son looks you in the eye and tells you it bothers him to feed you? How do you reach that level of insensitivity, of forgetting? Sometimes I sat in the rocker with an old notebook and started writing loose things, memories, phrases, dates. I wrote so I would not forget who I was, because I realized something important. When they make you feel like you are worth nothing, you can start to believe it yourself. And I did not want to allow myself that. Not after everything I lived through. Not after everything I fought for. One day, while I was sweeping the porch, I saw a young man arriving on a bicycle. He had dust on his face and a backpack on his shoulder. He waved at me from afar. "Mr. Frank?" I nodded, curious. "Mr. Henderson sent me. The one who rents your house, the Solitude place. He said you wanted me to bring you some papers." He handed me a thick envelope and thanked me for the glass of water I offered him. Inside the envelope were the updated rental contract documents, with a note from Mr. Henderson. "Everything is going well. I already deposited the month's rent. Whatever you need, I am at your service." I smiled. Not for the money, but for the feeling that something, at least something, was still working with respect. A few more weeks passed. I got used to the rhythm of the new life. In the town, they started to recognize me. They called me the old man from the white cabin. They gave me apples from the tree. They invited me to Sunday service. Even Pastor Jacobs asked me once to help fix some pews. And I, with my rusty tools but my steady hand, went to help. I felt useful again, valued. Until one day, without expecting it, I saw him in the distance. He was coming walking from the highway with his shirt soaked in sweat. David, my son, stopped in front of the gate. He said nothing at first. He looked at me as if he did not know if he had permission to enter. I, who in another time would have gotten up running to hug him, this time I stayed seated, calm. I looked at him steadily, without anger, without urgency. I signaled him with my hand. "Come in." He entered slowly, like someone stepping on unknown ground. He sat on a stone facing me. He took a deep breath. He told me, "Dad, we have been looking for you for days. We thought something bad had happened to you." I did not answer because there was no point in justifying myself. They knew where I had gone. It is just that they did not care until they noticed the lack of me. And absence, sometimes, screams louder than presence. "Patricia is worried. The kids ask for you." He kept talking with that voice that mixes guilt and pride. I just looked at him without words. Sometimes silence says more. Then he fell silent, and he looked at me as if he wanted to cry but did not know how, until finally he let it out. What I said that night was horrible. I did not mean it. I was tired. I felt drowned with everything. That you did not deserve that, Dad. I heard that. I heard it with a tight chest, but it did not move me. Not out of malice, but because one learns that words, when they arrive late, do not cure. They only explain. I told him with a soft voice, "I did not leave because of what you said, David. I left because I realized that you all did not want me there anymore." Because respect is not something you beg for, and love, when you have to plead for it, is no longer love. Apologies born of guilt are just weeds in a garden. They don't bear any fruit. He stayed silent. He lowered his head. He did not insist. He did not ask me to come back. He did not offer me anything. He just got up, put a hand on my shoulder and said, "I wanted to see you, to know you were okay." That was all. And he left. I watched him walk away down the dirt road under the midday sun. I did not stop him. I did not hug him. But I did not reject him either. Because what I did was not for revenge. It was for me. For my dignity. For my soul. And I understood that sometimes the bravest act is not to stay, but to go. And since then, he never came back. Not a call, not a letter, not a message sent by anyone. Nothing. But it did not surprise me, because deep down, I already knew that visit had not been out of love. It was out of shock. He came because for the first time in his life, he felt he had lost me. And there are people who do not value their own until they are gone. But mine was not a punishment nor a lesson. It was a decision, and I was not going to turn back. The days in the cabin went on peacefully. I had made a firm routine. Mondays I cleaned the yard. Tuesdays I made preserves. Wednesdays I walked to town. Mr. Henderson brought me the rent on time, and with that I had enough to live well. No luxuries, but with dignity. I got used to the silence, to my rocker in the afternoon, to the biscuits made by hand. I even started writing every night in a blue notebook. Reflections, phrases, memories. Some so old I did not even know if they were real, or just images my mind formed to comfort me. One Sunday, while I was sweeping the front of the house, I heard a car stop. It was Pastor Jacobs, the town minister. He got out with a serene smile, as always. "Mister, Frank, can I steal a few minutes?" I invited him in. We sat under the shade of the old oak tree. He spoke to me about the community, about a fair they were going to have, and if I could help build some shelves for the school. I told him yes, with pleasure. And just like that, without meaning to, I felt useful again. Working with wood gave me back something I did not know I missed. Purpose. Over time, my name began to ring out among the neighbors. The grandfather from the country who helps everyone. They invited me to lunch, gave me homemade bread, left fruit on the fence. One afternoon, a lady even asked me to talk to her grandson who was being rebellious. And I, without knowing how, ended up giving him advice that came from my soul. Listen to your grandma, son. You do not know what you have until you see it from far away. The boy looked at me as if he had never heard that before. Maybe no one had ever told him. One morning in June, I ran into Mrs. Higgins at the market, an older woman who had been my neighbor back near the Solitude place. She was surprised to see me. "You are David's father, right?" "Oh, honey, what a shame what they say around there." I stood still. "They say he's out of work, that his wife went to her parents' house, and that he's in trouble with the house where they lived." I did not ask more. It was not my style. But that night, when I got home, I sat in the rocker with a tight heart. Not out of sadness, but out of a rare mix of pain with calm. Because life always returns what one sows. The wheel of life turns slow, but it grinds fine. Days passed, and one afternoon, while repairing a bench in the church, Mr. Henderson approached me. He was agitated, nervous. "Mr. Frank? I do not know if I should tell you this, but your son came to see me. He wanted to know if you had left him something, any inheritance. He asked me if you had transferred properties or accounts to me." I stayed silent. I told him nothing, of course, but it made me sad. Not for him. For you. I nodded because I understood. It was not the first time someone looked for a father only when they needed something. But this time was different. This time I was not going to open the door. I was not going to go back. Because the respect that is lost takes a lifetime to recover. And in my case, I no longer had time to beg for affection. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "There are children who forget they were once children, and parents who forget they deserve rest." I closed the notebook, poured myself some hot tea, and looked at the moon from the door. I thought about Hope, about how she would have handled all this, about how her soft voice would have told me, "Let them be, Frank." Everyone reaps their own harvest. But it was not just letting be, it was closing, it was healing, it was putting a final period. The next day I received a letter with no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from David, a sheet folded in four. He asked for forgiveness. He said he was regretful, that everything fell apart since I left, that he found no peace, that he needed me, that he wanted me to come back. I read the letter 3 times. There was not a single mention of genuine affection, only need, pain, regret for what he lost, not for what he did to me. I did not answer. I burned the letter in the stove slowly, watching it turn to ash. Because sometimes forgiveness is not in returning, it is in letting go. And I, finally, was free. And that freedom was the most valuable gift life had given me. But what would come next was still to be written. That month it rained like it hadn't rained in years. The afternoons were dark skies. The mud rose on the roads and the trees at the back of the property filled with life. Everything was green, wet, and silent. I spent hours on the porch of the cabin with my cup of steaming coffee, listening to the water hitting the tin roof and the wind sneaking through the corners. It did not bother me. I liked it. Rain has that way of stirring up your thoughts and ordering your soul without asking permission. One morning, while digging in the garden to plant some peppers, I heard someone calling me from the entrance. I wiped my hands on the rag and looked out. It was Marcella, the daughter of Mr. Miller, the owner of the hardware store in town. She came with a quick step, carrying an envelope in her hand. "Mr. Frank, good morning. This letter is for you. A boy left it at the store this morning. He said it was urgent, but he did not want to give his name. I thanked her, offered to make her a coffee, but she was in a hurry, left me the envelope and went. I held it for a while in my hand. It was not heavy nor long, just a sheet, maybe two, but it had that smell of the past that one recognizes when something has not been closed well. I opened it slowly, sitting under the oak tree. It was from David, again. Dad, I know maybe you do not want to read this, but I do not have many ways to talk to you. I looked for you. I wrote to you. You do not answer. I do not know if you are angry, hurt, or simply do not want me in your life anymore. And if so, I understand. I deserve it, but I had to write to you, even if it is for the last time. I kept reading without moving a muscle, not because it hurt, but because I no longer knew if I cared. Things here got difficult. Patricia left with the kids. She says she needs time, that I am no longer the man I was. I lost my job 2 months ago and haven't been able to pay the mortgage. The bank called me. They say if I don't get the money, they are going to take the house. I am desperate, Dad. I say it with shame, but also with humility. I need you. Not for your money, for you. I stopped there. I put the letter away. There was no need to read the rest, because you already know. You already understand. And although words say one thing, the heart recognizes the intention. And my son's intention was not to reunite. It was to save himself. That night I did not sleep, not out of anguish, but from thinking. Because for the first time in my life, I had the possibility to act without fear, without guilt. And that, at my age, is a gift that is not despised. The next morning I walked to town. I did not go to the bank. I did not go to the market. I went straight to the church. I sat in the last pew. There was no service, only the echo of birds and the melted wax of candles. I closed my eyes. I spoke with hope, as I used to do when things were hard. I did not ask for advice, I just told her what I felt. He needs me now, but not as a father, but as a lifeline. And you know what? I'm not sure I want to be that again. Leaving the church, I made a decision. I was not going to answer him. I was not going to write to him. I was not going to go. But I was going to protect the little I had left, because even if he didn't look for me with love anymore, I wasn't going to allow the same son who told me he couldn't keep feeding me to now come and take what I built with my hands. I went to the town lawyer, a short man with more papers than space on his desk. I told him my story without decorations. I showed him my documents, my accounts, the deeds, and I told him clearly, I want to leave everything in order, that if one day something happens to me, no one can put their hand where they shouldn't. The lawyer looked at me hard. He nodded. He prepared some papers for me. I signed with a tranquility that trembled in my fingers. I made my will. I put a local foundation that helps abandoned elderly people as the beneficiary. I asked that my cabin be destined, the day I am no longer here, to house someone like me, an old man who has nowhere to go. I left there lighter, not out of resentment, but out of justice. Sometimes saving someone means letting them fall so they can learn how to stand up. That afternoon, I wrote in my notebook, it is not about punishing the one who hurt you. It is about protecting the little you have left intact. Days later, David came to town. Marcella told me she saw him in the square asking for me. No one told him exactly where I lived, not because they didn't know, but because here, in this corner, people know how to take care of their own. It is not that they hide me. It is that they protect me. And that is worth more than all the money I could have given him. That same night, someone left a package at my door. It had no name, just a small box with a photo inside. It was an old picture, me holding David when he was a boy in front of the Solitude place.
Underneath, a note written by hand.
Sorry for forgetting where I come from. I did not cry. I did not respond. I just put it in the drawer where I keep the letters that aren't answered, the memories that aren't thrown away, and the wounds that no longer bleed. Because now, the wound was closing, but not everything was said yet. What was going to happen next was going to mark my story forever. The weeks that followed were silent. A different silence. Not the one from before, the one that hurt. This was rather a firm silence, as if finally the pieces inside me had aligned. I got up early, swept the front of the house, walked to the garden, checked my plants. On the neighbor's radio, old country songs played, and sometimes I stood listening from the porch, feeling that time was no longer running me, that finally I was walking it myself. I didn't hear from David again.
I heard through others that he had tried to sell the truck but didn't have the papers in order, that the house was in foreclosure, that Patricia was still living with her parents, and that she had no intention of going back to him. I didn't ask anything, but the townspeople talked, sometimes out of gossip, others out of compassion, but everyone knew one thing. I didn't want anyone to look for him for me. That decision I made the day I burned his letter, and every day that passed, that decision affirmed itself more in my spirit. One Thursday morning, the lawyer called me. He wanted me to stop by his office to sign the final documents. Everything is in order, Mr. Frank. No one will be able to claim a single brick when you are no longer here. And while you live, you are the absolute owner of your peace. I thanked him with a strong handshake because what I had done was not just a formality. It was closing a cycle. It was putting a padlock on what before opened with a simple tear. Leaving the office, I sat on a bench in the square. I had a sweet roll in one hand and the fresh air on my face. I looked around. I saw some kids playing, an older man reading an old newspaper, a woman selling flowers. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Not to a physical place, but to myself. That night I wrote in my notebook something that came from my soul. Sometimes, the true home is not where you were born. It is where they respect you. A couple of days later I went to visit Mrs. Baker, a widow who lived alone in a house a little up the road. She always invited me to dinner and gave me hot soup like Hope used to make. That night, she asked me if it didn't hurt deep down that my son was suffering. I answered calmly, "Of course it hurts. But I cannot heal in the same place where they broke me." She looked at me for a long time. Then she got up, put a blanket over my shoulders, and said, "You are not alone, Mr. Frank. Here we love you well." That phrase stuck with me. The next day, very early, someone knocked on my door. It was a young man with a backpack, nervous. He told me he came from a lawyer in the city, that David was trying to file a claim to prove that I had disinherited him unfairly, that he wanted to contest the will. I looked at him with serenity. I offered him a glass of water, and I said, "Tell whoever sent you that he shouldn't worry anymore. What was mine remains mine, but my peace, that has no price." The boy left confused. Maybe he thought I was going to get angry or cry, but not anymore. I had no tears left for those who only knew how to look for me out of interest. That same day I went to the bank. I closed the old accounts. I opened a new one in the name of the foundation. I signed the last papers. I left clear instructions. No family member could access a penny. The bank manager, a serious and respectful man, shook my hand and said, "Few men make decisions like this in life. You didn't just leave everything in order. You left a lesson." And yes, maybe that was the only thing I could still leave. I returned home with a light soul. I cooked rice with an egg, I sat down to eat, looking at the open window where a golden sunset light entered. I thought about my youngest granddaughter, the one who one day approached me with fear to ask if I was poor because I ate stew every day. I told her no, that I was rich because I had never lost my appetite for life. Today, after everything, I think that was the most honest answer I gave in many years. Before sleeping, I lit a candle, not out of superstition, but out of hope. I sat in front of her photo and spoke to her. I didn't see him again, love, and I don't know if I will see him ever again. But finally I understood that it wasn't my job to carry him. No more. Not again. And then I closed my eyes. I slept like I hadn't slept in years, without anger, without fear, without waiting. Because sometimes the strongest act of love is to leave without closing the door, but knowing that you don't plan to enter again. And that was not the end yet. The strongest part was about to arrive. That day dawned with the sky completely clear. It was strange because it had been raining every day for weeks. But just that Sunday, the sun came out early, strong, golden, as if it wanted to remind me that life went on. I got up earlier than usual. I prepared pot coffee with cinnamon, just how I liked to do it on Sundays when Hope was alive. I sat on the patio to drink it slowly, watching the rays cross between the branches of the apple tree. The singing of the birds wrapped around me, and for the first time in many years, I felt that I didn't need anything else. Not a call, not a visit, not a forgiveness that didn't arrive. I was okay like this. Finally, okay. I was sweeping the entrance of the house when I saw him. He was coming down the dirt road, walking slowly, with a backpack on his shoulder and his gaze lost on the ground. I knew it was him from afar. David. I wasn't surprised. I just stood there, with the broom in my hand, watching him come. When he arrived in front of me, he looked up and stayed silent. He looked tired, thinner, older. But what caught my attention the most was that finally he lowered his head. "Hi, Dad," he said, almost in a whisper. I didn't answer immediately. I turned, opened the patio door, and gestured with my head, that he could pass, that he could sit. I made him coffee. I served it in the blue mug, the usual one. We sat facing each other in silence. He looked at the floor. I looked at his hands. They were trembling a little. "I didn't come to ask you for anything," he said finally, without looking at me. "I just wanted to see you." I nodded. He didn't need to explain anything. I had already seen it all. I lost the house. The bank took it. Patricia divorced me. She says she doesn't want the kids to see me like this, defeated, without a job. I looked for help. No one opened the door. I said nothing. I just drank another sip of coffee. And then I remembered. I remembered you. How you fed me when there was nothing. How you sold your tools to pay for my books. How you slept on the floor when I was sick and needed the bed. I remembered everything, Dad. Everything I forgot for years. He kept talking, but it was no longer my son who spoke. It was a broken man, a man who finally had seen his own reflection. He lowered his voice as if he couldn't sustain his own shame. And then I understood that the most terrible thing I did wasn't kicking you out of the house. It was making you feel like you were worth nothing. And there, right there, something hit my chest, not out of pity, but because for the first time in his life, he told the truth. I didn't come to ask you to come back, nor for you to forgive me. I just came to tell you that even if it is late, I respect you, Dad. He got up. He looked me in the eyes for the first time in many years. And there, I saw my son. Not the proud man who humiliated me, but the boy who one day took my hand with fear when we crossed the street together for the first time. "I'll leave you in peace," he said, "but I needed to tell you that." He left through the same door he had entered. I didn't stop him. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him everything was okay, because it wasn't. But that time, it didn't hurt. I stayed there watching the dust rise with his steps, and I knew that maybe, for the first time in a long time, he too was going to start walking his own path, without carrying me as an excuse. That afternoon, I went to the room, took out the blue notebook, and wrote, "Respect that arrives late does not heal, but at least it leaves no more wounds." And I closed the notebook with the tranquility of one who expects nothing anymore. What would come next would no longer change me, because this time, I was already complete. 2 weeks passed since that last visit. I didn't hear from David anymore, nor did I expect to. I heard from Mrs. Higgins that they had seen him by the city market looking for work, with the same backpack and the same silence on his face. I didn't ask more. Not because I didn't care. One never stops feeling something for a son. But because I understood that our business had had its closure. A final conversation, dry, real, and sufficient. For him and for me. I continued with my simple life. I got up early, tended my plants, helped at the church when needed. The townspeople no longer saw me as the old man from the field, but as Mr. Frank, the man everyone respected. And that had a value no one was going to take from me. Not the bank, not the government, not the blood. One day in the square, they invited me to speak at a meeting of the Senior Citizens Center. They told me they wanted me to tell my story. I told them it was nothing special, that I didn't have great feats to tell, but they insisted. So I went. I sat in the middle of a dozen men and women with white hair and eyes full of roads traveled. And I spoke. I spoke calmly. I told how my life was before, how I built my house with hope, how we raised our children with cornbread, sweat, and patience, how I aged with dignity, until one day someone looked me in the eyes and told me, "I can't stand having to feed you anymore." I felt a knot in my throat, but I didn't lower my voice. I told them everything, without drama, without shame. Because you don't have to hide what you lived, even if it hurts. Because what is lived with dignity is told with pride. When I finished, no one applauded, but it wasn't necessary. A lady approached, took my hand, and said, "Thank you for saying what many of us keep silent." And in that moment, I knew my story wasn't just mine, that what I had suffered, others had also lived in silence, out of fear, out of habit, and that speaking is also a form of healing. That night, upon arriving home, I sat on the patio under the clear sky. It was cold. I lit a small fire and stayed watching the embers. I thought about Hope, about what she would have said if she had seen me that day, speaking in front of everyone. She would have smiled at me with those sweet eyes of hers, and she would have told me, "See that your voice still has strength." And yes, it had it, even though many wanted to silence it. A few days later, I received a letter from the foundation to which I had left my assets. They thanked me for the gesture, for the trust, and told me they had already started organizing a program to house elderly people abandoned in homes like mine. They even offered me to name the project. I told them yes, that it should be called Hope. Not for my wife, but for what she sowed in me, because that name meant everything. Reading that, I realized that what I did not only changed my destiny, but was going to change the lives of others. That my pain, channeled with justice and decision,
could give shelter to those who today slept in borrowed beds, eating from charity, feeling less. And I felt for the first time in years that my story had been worth it. But the world doesn't stop when one finds peace. There is always someone coming to test the calm. One afternoon, they knocked on the door hard. I went out slowly. It was a young girl, brunette, thin, with clear eyes like David. She would be about 12, maybe 13 years old. "Are you Mr. Frank?" I nodded with a tight heart. "I am your granddaughter. My mom doesn't know I'm here, but I wanted to meet you." I stayed mute. I looked at her. I didn't know what to say. My legs trembled. "Can I come in?" I nodded again, opening the door slowly. I offered her a glass of water. She sat down. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and nerves. I asked her name. She told me. It was Grace, a name Hope had always wanted to give a granddaughter. I felt my soul fall to the floor. "My dad talked to us about you. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But when he got angry, he shouted your name. And I wanted to know who was the man who hurt him so much." I couldn't answer. I had a knot in my throat that wouldn't let go. "I don't want anything, Grandpa. I just wanted to know if you existed. And if you still had that kind face I imagined." I laughed softly. She did too. And there, without knowing how, 2 tears fell. Not out of sadness, but because, for the first time, life was returning something to me that I thought lost forever. The girl came 3 more times during that month, always alone. Always with that clean look, as if they hadn't yet dirtied her heart with the miseries of the adult world. I didn't ask her about her mother, nor about David, and she didn't talk much about them either. We talked about simple things, about how she took care of her plants at school, about how she liked to write stories, about how she wanted to learn to make stew like mine. She was smart, tender, and brave. She asked me if she could come on Saturdays to read me what she wrote. I told her, of course, that chair on the patio would always be for her. And so it began. Those Saturdays became the best moment of my week. She sat under the tree with her lined notebook, and she read me stories of animals, of grandfathers who knew how to fly, of girls who went out to look for answers in the hills. I listened with my eyes closed, imagining that Hope also heard her from some corner of the sky. I felt full. Not happy. Full. What is more important? Because happiness comes and goes, but fullness, that settles silently and sustains you. One Saturday, after reading me a story about a bird that didn't know how to fly but learned to sing, she stared at me and said, "Do you know you look a lot like the grandfather in the story?" I smiled. "Why?" I asked. "Because you don't try to fly, but you make others want to stay." That phrase, I kept it forever. After that, I started noticing something strange. One day I saw David standing far away at the end of the road, looking towards the house. He didn't approach. He just looked. The next Saturday, I knew that he himself had accompanied the girl until half a block before and waited in silence. I didn't go look for him. I didn't invite him. But I didn't close the door either. Not much passed until one day she didn't come. I worried. I went out to the road. I waited a while. Nothing. That night I slept restless. The next morning David appeared, alone, with a haggard face. He greeted me with a shy gesture. "She's sick," he said. "High fever. It's not serious, I think, but she didn't want me to come without telling you that she waits for you every Saturday." I nodded. I asked him if they needed anything. He told me no, that he had just enough. But he said it with lowered eyes, with that way of saying yes, from silence. He came back 2 days later. He brought a bag of oranges. He left them for me at the gate. I was watering the plants and I approached. He told me she was getting better, that she asked for me, that she got mad if you didn't tell her how her grandpa was. Yes, he called me her grandpa. Not the old man, not the mister. The grandpa. David stayed a while on the patio. We didn't talk about us. We talked about her, about how she wrote, about how she got happy with a plate of rice with fried apples. I told him that at that age, Hope knitted clothes for her dolls with scraps of cloth. He laughed. It was the first time I saw him laugh without sarcasm in years. He got up to go and stopped at the door. He looked at me for a long time. I didn't come for money, not anymore. I just wanted to tell you that if one day you want to see your grandkids again, the door is open. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I didn't answer, but I didn't shut him out either. I limited myself to nodding slowly. He understood and left. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Not everything is forgiven, but some things are transformed." The following Saturday, the girl returned with a scarf knitted by her. She put it on my neck. "So your heart doesn't get cold," she told me. I laughed. And there, in that laugh, I knew that life had turned full circle. There was no reconciliation. There was no happy ending. But there was something more powerful. A new truth, clean, honest. And in the middle of all that, a letter arrived. A formal invitation signed by the town hall. They wanted to give me recognition for my contribution to the community, for signing over the house to the foundation, for the talks to the elderly, for helping repair the church pews. I didn't know what to say. I stayed reading that letter over and over again, not out of vanity, but because, after so many years, someone was telling me, what you are matters. And that I really didn't expect. But what was going to happen in that ceremony? Would it be the true end of everything, or the true beginning? The day of the ceremony arrived with fresh air, as if the sky also wanted to clean itself a little. I got up early. I shaved calmly with the old razor I kept since my days as a young man. I put on my best shirt, a white one, ironed, with thick buttons, the same one Hope gave me for a birthday. I checked my shoes, put on my hat, and went out with time. The event would be in the central square in front of the town hall building. They had told me there would be neighbors, authorities, some school children. But what I didn't know was that there would be more. When I arrived, they had already installed a small stage with chairs for the guests and some flowers decorating the front. They greeted me with affection, with sincere hugs, with words that didn't sound empty. "Thank you for your example, Mr. Frank. Thank you for not giving up." I sat in the first row with my heart beating slow, not out of nerves, but out of gratitude. I never imagined that at my age someone would invite me to something like this. I always thought that old men like me faded away in a corner like old forgotten lamps. The event began. An MC spoke about my history, without personal details, but with respect. He mentioned my contribution to the community, my decision to leave my house to the foundation, my words at the senior center. And then they called me to the front. I walked slow but steady. The whole square went silent. I took the microphone. I didn't have a speech, just a full heart. "I am not an important man," I said. "I am just a man who lived, who loved, who fell many times, who was a father, a husband, a bricklayer, and also an ignored old man. But I am here not because I sought recognition, but because I decided not to disappear." There was a soft murmur among the people. I continued. Many of us who are here have felt that we are no longer useful, that we are a burden, that we bother. But it is not like that. Our life, does it have worth? Our story, does it matter? And as long as we have a voice, even if it trembles, we have to use it. My hand trembled a little, but my voice came out firm. I did not come seeking justice. I came to remember that we are not dead until we stop having dignity. They applauded me, slowly, but with strength. And just when I turned to return to my seat, I saw them. David, standing at the back, with red eyes, with a straight back. By his side, her, my granddaughter Grace. And next to her, the other two kids. They were holding a sign that said, "Thank you, Grandpa, for not forgetting yourself." I did not move. I did not cry. But inside me, something rearranged itself. I did not hug them. I did not go towards them. But I did not look away either. And in that small instant, where the wounds did not disappear, but they no longer hurt so much, I knew that that story, mine, had already been told completely. That night, I returned home alone, but not empty. I lit a candle, sat in the rocker, and opened the blue notebook for the last time. I wrote that not all children deserve our silence, but we deserve to live in peace without begging for love. Finally, I am just me. And if you made it this far, thank you for letting my story have a place in your heart. Share this, because somewhere out there, another grandfather is waiting to be heard. Now tell me, which part of this story touched your heart the most? And from which corner of this world are you listening to me?